Okay, today I'm going to give a share on the Erev Rav. Well, who are they? What are they? What is their Indian? What is the purpose, and so on? Because it's becoming very relevant in a certain way, and we're going to talk about the relevance of the Erev Rav, and we're going to talk about a very big chiddush that happened. Okay, so we'll kind of start. Now, the Vilna Gaon says that the the last shibud, or the last oppression on the Jewish people in Klal Yisrael, will be the Erev Rav. That's what he says. He says after Esav and after Yishmael, the last main one for the last couple of 100 years was the Erev Rav. And who was the Erev Rav? Well, when the Jews left Egypt, the question is, who is the Erev Rav, and why are they so relevant that they are now the last oppression of the Jewish people and so on? The Erev Rav are actually Jews, and they are Jews who are fundamentally oppressing Klal Yisrael because they want to take the Jewish people away from their religion, from the spiritual connection to God. And these are there's certain types of Jews that even though now the Erev Rav can be Jews who are religious, who are from, and they can be Jews who are not from. In fact, the Erev Rav could be many Jews that we would be shocked that they're Jews. They can be people who are leaders of Klal Yisrael. They can be some Rosh Hashivas, some Rosh Kollel, some Rabbonim. So the fact that a person is religious or not is not an indication whether he's an Erev Rav, because the Erev Rav is a section of the Jewish people who fundamentally, by the way they influence the Jewish people, are able to dismiss in some way and make people more distant from God. Who are the Erev Rav? Well, a long time ago, when Moshe Rabbeinu took the Jews out of Egypt, he decided to take some Egyptians with him. There were many Egyptians in Egypt at the time who were extremely impressed by what was happening to Egypt. These Egyptians saw the power of God, and the way he was giving the plagues, and the way he was convincing the Egyptians to let them go, specifically Pharaoh, the Pharaoh of Egypt. And there were many Egyptians who saw this entire conflict and realized that the real power belongs to God, that the power does not belong to Egypt, even though Egypt was the greatest nation in the world at that time. But they saw that next to the power of God, the power of the Egyptians was like nil. It didn't exist. So therefore, when Moshe Rabbeinu told the Jews to begin to leave Egypt, when he took them out of Egypt to Har Sinai to receive the Torah, many of these people, these Erev Rav, decided to join the Jews and partner with them, and in a certain way, to become Jews. So these were actually the descendants of ancient Egyptians who decided to become the Jews because they were very impressed with the whole thing that was happening to Egypt at the time of the giving of the Torah. Now, the purpose of the giving of the Torah the purpose of the Jews going into Egypt was eventually to earn the schus, the merit of receiving the Torah. And as I've said before, but I'm not going to linger on this, the whole purpose of the Torah was to give the Jews the 630 commandments and change their status. Originally, all the people of the world were obligated to keep 7 commandments, and these 7 commandments were fundamentally given to Adam Rishon and given down also by Noach at that time. There were 7 mitzvahs. Some of the mitzvahs were between man and God, like, for example, not to curse God, to believe in God, and so on. And some of these mitzvahs of the Noah, they're called the Noahide laws, were mitzvahs between man and man. thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery, and thou shalt not kill, and so on. So these were 7 mitzvahs that were a combination of the 2 categories of between man and God and man and man. But at a certain point in time, approximately the time when Avram became the patriarch of the Jews, that God decided to change the nature of the recipient of Olam Haba. He decided to split human race into 2 people. His intent, God's intent, was to give all the people who descended from Abraham, from Avram Avinu, a new set of commandments. Instead, this set of commandments was 630 commandments. And of course, what I said last time before, that the reason why God decided to change the number of commandments is because he decided to give the number of commandments which were totally in parallel to the structure of the universe and the structure of the human being. It said that the soul is composed of 613 parts or segments, 365 veins or sinews, and 248 organs. And the soul of a human being is also divided into 613 parts, and also the body is also subdivided in the 613 parts. And each of the parts of the body and the soul parallels a specific mitzvah, either a mitzvah which is a positive commandment. Those were 248 positive commandments, and 365 negative commandments of thou shalt not. And God decided to give 630 mitzvahs and so on to the Jewish people so that they can earn Olam Haba. Why did he decide to change it? Because he wanted to, in a certain sense, guarantee that the Jewish people, the ones who will receive the 630 commandments, would be guaranteed, they would have a guaranteed chelik portion of the world to come. How was that? Because there were many mitzvahs that were of 2 categories. Not only were the mitzvahs divided into the category of between man and God, but they were also divided into the category and man. But there was another subdivision of the 630 commandments. This subdivision happened to be performance mitzvahs and rehabilitation mitzvahs. There were certain performance mitzvahs that Jews had to do both to God and to man. You know, to God, like the Shabbos, Kashrus, Tzitzis, Tefillin, and so on. But there were also performance mitzvahs between man and man. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery, and so on and so forth. These are performance mitzvahs in the sense that the Jews had to do these mitzvahs and observe these mitzvahs so that they would earn a portion in the world to come, specifically to masaken the problem of Nam Sufa. They had to earn the reward in Olam Haba. But in actuality, it wasn't so much a reward to earn, but they had to love God and love their fellow man. And by doing this, they would unify. They would consider God as they would consider themselves as being a part of God. And as I once said, this would relieve the yichud pressure, because the nature of God is such that he includes everything. Ein od milvado, or ein od, there is nothing else. God includes everything that was ever made. And as an earmark of that particular inclusion, there's a certain yichud pressure. There's a pressure of God's unity on anything that he creates. Because since he contains and includes everything that was ever created or made, there's a yichud pressure that he would have to, that everything would have to acknowledge as being part of that God. And if you did not acknowledge as being a piece of God, part of God, the yichud pressure, the pressure that comes from his yichud, his unity, his oneness, would actually annihilate anything which would contradict the yichud of God. So this is called Nam Sufa. the ability to attach to God and associate with Him, specifically by recognizing His unity. And by doing this, he would then have he would have a portion of the world to come. But essentially, there was also a category of mitzvahs called rehabilitation mitzvahs. And these were done if a person sinned. In other words, if a person sinned, he would bring a series of sacrifices, korbanos, to relieve himself of the onerous burden of a sin. If a person did a sin, he would bring sacrifices in the temple for the sin and so on. So these were called rehabilitation mitzvahs because what they did, they rehabilitated a person from the burden of sinning. So the sum total of what all these mitzvahs did is not only were they able to earn for the Jewish people a place in the world to come, which exists eternally, but they were able to guarantee that because they had a series of mitzvahs which would actually relieve them of the burden of sinning. It would rehabilitate them. And therefore, their position in the world to come was almost guaranteed that they would be there because they would do certain mitzvahs to pardon themselves or rehabilitate themselves, like repentance, korbanos, and a lot of the Jewish holidays. A lot of these mitzvahs had to do with the idea of rehabilitation. So God gave the 630 commandments to rehabilitate them. So Moshe Rabbeinu brought the Jewish people to Mount Sinai to receive the Torah. Now, it happened to be that Moshe went up to the mountain for 40 days. And there was a miscalculation about when Moses would return. Moshe was supposed to return after 40 days, but when they counted the days, they miscalculated, and they thought it was only 39 days. They thought it was rather 41 days. So they thought he should have returned, but he didn't. It wasn't the time yet. It was less than the 40 days. So instead, the Erev, the Egyptian people, the people from Egypt who wanted to join the people and receive the Torah with them, convinced them to make an idol called the golden calf, the Egel Azov. And this was an idol in the form that would take the place of Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Egyptians said, now that we see that Moshe Rabbeinu probably died because they were granted an image by the Sultan that Moshe Rabbeinu was dead, that he died and he was lying on a bed. So therefore the Jewish people actually believed that this vision was actually it was a prophetic vision, although it was not. It was a vision given to them by the Sultan. And the Sultan had the ability to test them one more time before they would receive the commandments. So the Erev therefore seduced the Jewish people to worship the golden calf. So the real question is, that happened over 3,000 years ago when the golden calf was given, because the golden calf was made at the time that Moshe Rabbeinu was up on the mountain to receive the 613 commandments. So what does the Vilna Gaon mean that the Erev are the last great enemies of the Jewish people? That the force, what they do, they oppress the Jews because they try and take away the relationship between the Jewish people and God. The relationship between the Jewish people and God, in that they accept fully the absolute unity and sovereignty of God Himself as exercised in the 630 commandments. But that happened a long time ago. Why does the Vilna Gaon say that the Erev are the ones who are now oppressing the Jews today? This happened 3,000 years ago. So what business does the Erev have with the Jewish people now? The business that they had with the Jewish people was to seduce them, to test them whether or not they would be loyal to God 3,000 years ago. So why have they returned? And the Vilna Gaon says they are the primary burden of the Jewish people and causing them to sin, causing them to leave their religion. So what does it mean that they're back? They're back trying to do the same thing. Now the Vilna Gaon does not actually explain this. He just simply says that this is what's going on. So I'm going to try and explain to this what's going on in this thing itself, what is really the reason why they're back, and why they're the main shibud, or the main goddess of Klal Yisrael, right before the Mashiach comes. We all know that the Mashiach is almost here. He's imminent. But the Vilna Gaon seems to be saying that the last great enemy of the Jewish people is the Erev right before the Mashiach comes. And we're wondering why. Because their association with the Jewish people happened a long time ago. So I'm going to try and explain the entire Inyan, the entire matter of what the Erev is, what they're supposed to do, and why they're back. What most people don't know is that the Jewish people had a war with Egypt. That's right. The Jewish people had 3 wars with Egypt. What were these 3 wars? Well, the first war was that the Jews were in Egypt as slaves. So therefore, the Egyptians tried to keep them as slaves. Now, the Jews won that war. Why? Because they were able to get out of Egypt. And therefore, once they were able to get out of Egypt, they won the war. And then there was a second war that they had with Egypt. Because Egypt decided, even though the Jews left and went to the Red Sea, Egyptians decided that they would chase them, go after them, and bring them back, again as slaves, or kill them. Now the Jews won that war too, because at the Red Sea, the Egyptians were killed, were destroyed. They went into the water after the Jews went into the Red Sea. It's called Kriyas Yamsuf. The Jews first went into the Red Sea, which was split, divided, and then after the Jews went in and got to the other side, the Egyptians suddenly decided to go in after them, and they were all drowned. The only one who was left, the only one who survived the killing of the Red Sea, the Kriyas Yamsuf, was Paro himself. And God let him live so that he would always know the supremacy and the power of God himself. So therefore, these were 2 wars, and 2 wars the Egyptians lost. The war that they had with Egypt while they were in Egypt, the Jews, and the war that the Egyptians tried to conquer them again at the Kriyas Yamsuf at the Red Sea. What was the 3rd war? Because we only have a record of really 2 wars. We have no record that there was a 3rd war. And the real answer is there was a 3rd war, and that 3rd war was the golden calf. You see it. The golden calf, when they seduced the Jews to worship the golden calf, that was actually a spiritual war. It was not a physical war, it was a spiritual war. And it was the intent of the Egyptians to what? To try and get the Jews to worship a golden calf, which was according to the halacha, is an idol. Now, why did they try and do this? And really, what was the whole purpose of Moshe Rabbeinu in bringing down the 2 tablets from Har Sinai on Shuras? What was really going on? And unfortunately, many people do not know really what the significance of that event. Because God decided to give the Jews a guarantee to get Olam Haba. But that guarantee fundamentally was God's desire to start the Messianic period. Moshe Rabbeinu was really a Mashiach. He was a Gilgul from Noach. He was a Gilgul from Noach and so on. And he decided, God decided that he should be the Mashiach of the Jewish people. And the Torah that was given was actually the 50th gate. Now we all know that the 50th gate is the Nun Sharei Bina, the 50th gate. And that's the highest level of Torah. And from that level, you can almost answer any question that you had. It gives you the information and the knowledge of why everything happens in the world. It explains every event in the universe, all the events that occur to man, and exactly, the Rebbe Shem explains, exactly how and why he created the universe. So one would have a total vision, a total understanding of what the Torah would be from these 2 tablets. And eventually, when God would give all the 630 commandments, he would also explain all the events that would happen from then on in human history. So therefore, the 50th gate, which was the 2 tablets that Moshe Rabbeinu brought down on Shavuos, was really the messianic light, and Moshe Rabbeinu was the Mashiach. But what happened? Because of the mistake that the Jews made, and they calculated that Moshe Rabbeinu may have died up on the mountain, and the Erev convincing the Jews that they should replace the Moshe Rabbeinu as Mashiach with an idol. So they created a golden calf, which is a symbol of Mashiach ben Yosef. The calf is a symbol of Yosef. Because from the Bracha, Yaakov gave Yosef a Bracha, B'chol Shoyroi Hodoloi, that the beauty of a calf is what he called is the symbol of Yosef himself. So therefore, they decided to build a golden calf, and this would be the idol. They would be able to worship the idol. So they constructed this as a symbol of the 50th gate and the symbol of what of Moshe Rabbeinu. So therefore, we see that what the Erev did was actually a war, because the fact that they were successful was a terrible thing. The fact that they were successful in convincing the Jewish people to worship the golden calf, except for the tribe of Levi, but they were successful, they therefore stopped the possibility of the messianic light coming down. When Moshe Rabbeinu came down and he saw the messianic, he had the messianic light in his hands of the Luchos. The Luchos Rishonis, which are the first tablets that had the 10 Commandments on it that he brought down, was the beginning of the 50th gate. And when he came down and he saw the Jews worshiping a calf and what they were doing, he took them and he threw them down at Klal Yisrael, and it broke. And what was left of the tablets itself was in broken form. So therefore, the Jews failed to deliver the 50th gate, which was the Messianic light. They were supposed to start the Messianic era with the Moshe Mashiach, with Moshe Rabbeinu, as they went into Israel. But because he broke the tablets, the Jews failed to bring down that light to the world. And God decided to withhold the Mashiach and the Messianic light from Klal Yisrael. Why? Because of the sin of the golden calf, in which the Erev convinced the Jews. Erev, the Erev is a translation, mixed multitude. And they were called the mixed multitude because they were Egyptians. They were descendants from Egyptians. They were not descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. They were descendants of the Egyptians. And they wanted to convince the Jews that the Messianic light will never happen. It will happen only in the way they prescribed, which is through a golden calf. So they prevented the Messianic period, the Moshe Mashiach, from starting at that point. So when the Jews would go into Israel after they left the desert, what would happen is that they would go out. That would be the beginning of the Moshe Mashiach. Even Tchias HaMesim also started then, because the Jews died when God was giving the first 2 commandments, and they fulfilled the concept of the death, which was ordained because of the sin of Adam Rishon. And having repented for the sin of Adam Rishon, therefore it could start the Messianic period with Moshe Rabbeinu. And this was as God intended. But God decided to withhold the Messianic light from the Jewish people, and Moshe Rabbeinu had to go up and bring down a second pair of tablets on Yom Kippur. And the second pair of tablets is the Torah that we have today. So the question is, if this is what they did, if they declared a war against the Jews, and this war will be that they would seduce them to worship the golden calf, why is it that they have to come back in history at the modern era now? What is the purpose of this event? Why do we have to deal with them? So the answer is they have to come back because of what they did to the Jews the first time around. God spoke to them, to the Erev, and said, because you have prevented me by causing the Jews to worship a golden calf, and you have prevented me from giving the Yemos Mashiach at this point in time. Therefore, you will have a new assignment. Your assignment will be many of you who did this and so on and so forth, which was fundamentally most of them. Many of you who did this and so on will have to come back at the end of time, or when I bring the final Mashiach. When I bring the Mashiach will be toward the end of time, close to the year 6000. You will have to come back. You will all be reincarnated, and you will have to come back, and you will have to do the same thing. That's right. You will have to try and build a golden calf again. That's right. But it wasn't the actual golden calf. You have an assignment. It is your job to try and make the Jews not religious at all, abandon Judaism, or even if you keep Judaism, in certain ways to see to it that they should abandon God, because they will be angry at me. You will teach them to worship me with anger. And this anger and so on and so forth that you teach them to do it will be an oppressive religion. So even though some of you will teach the Jews some Torah and will be high people, many perhaps very big people, but it is your job to repeat the sin of the golden calf by taking the Jewish people at that time away from me, from way truly associating and worshiping me. Now, why did God require that? Why did God give the Erevav a second chance to take the Jews away and to re-worship the golden calf? Now, it's important to understand they were not supposed to create a new golden calf, but in a certain sense, they were supposed to repeat the process of distancing the Jewish people from God. And therefore, that is similar to the golden calf, because what they did was the definition of the Erevav was to introduce a new religion, which is similar to the golden calf. And what do I mean, a new religion? It's either to make the Jews not religious and take away the entire knowledge of Judaism. And these are, for example, Reformed rabbis and many conservative rabbis, Reconstructionists, all those Jews that creates alternatives to Judaism. Right, that say God did the Torah that God gave is what we say it is. No, the Torah that God gave is not the Torah of 630 commandments, but it's the Torah of worshiping Judaism in the form of Reformed Judaism. That Moshe Rabbeinu is the one who wrote the Torah. It was not received by God. Reformed Jews almost entirely are considered apikosim, because they don't believe that what God gave the Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu on Sinai. So they believe that perhaps Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it or other people wrote it. But fundamentally the Torah is man-made. That's the essence of the Reform movement in Judaism. It's also the essence, basically, of conservative Judaism also. So most people and Reconstructionists, all these people really do not worship the Torah that God gave on Mount Sinai. So as far as God is concerned, that is actually a repetition of the golden calf. Now, not only was this a repetition of the golden calf, there were other repetitions which I will mention soon. Now, the question is, why did God want this to happen? Why does God want there to be a negative force amongst the Jews themselves? Why does God want many of these Erevav, who are reincarnated Jews from that time, to again repeat the sin of the golden calf? So to answer this question, we have to understand a very important fact, that God wants to save the Jewish people even when they sin. And that's why he gave them many mitzvahs, which are rehabilitation mitzvahs, so that they can repent and they can do fix the fact that they sinned. That's why he gave them the laws of korbanos, kachim, so that they can repent for many sins that they do. So besides that, God is always trying to test the Jews to see if they will be worthy to be with in Olam Haba. But one of the ways he wants to do that also is to, if they do sins, they don't do the mitzvahs in any real way, he still wanted to save them. The attribute of mercy is so great that God is continuously trying to make the Jews a winner. God does not want to according to the attribute of justice. He wants to save them. But how do you save them if they sin? That's the main question that we have to ask. How can God save the Jewish people even when most of them are preoccupied with sinning? In other words, many of those Reformed Jews and conservative Jews and Reconstructionists are Jews who really don't keep the Torah, or even if they keep the Torah, they only keep it because they believe a man wrote it. They don't believe God did it. So how can God save them from this? Because there's apikosim. They are considered non-believers in the sense that they don't believe that God actually wrote the Torah and commanded the Torah himself. Why does God want that? Because God simply says this: what I will do is, if Jews sin, I will bring them back. I will reincarnate them. But every time I reincarnate them, they will have less and less free will. I will begin to reduce the level of free will that the Jews have. Why? Because I will make it dark. I will take away the knowledge of the mitzvahs or the ability to do mitzvahs. For example, when God destroyed the temple, the first and second time, what did he really do? He actually confiscated all those mitzvahs that had to do with korbanos, that had to do with sacrifices. So therefore, the Jews had no longer any free will to do mitzvahs. And what would that accomplish? They would not be accountable for many of these mitzvahs. In other words, even though the Jews are doing sin, and therefore they are responsible, but they are not accountable. Why? Because they can't do it. They cannot do these mitzvahs anymore. In fact, when the Jews are in a position where they don't learn Torah anymore, like all the Jews who were in Russia, for 70 years they were in Russia under communism. They never learned any Torah, and they didn't know anything at all about the mitzvahs. They didn't even know what Shabbos was or any of these mitzvahs. So therefore, by putting them in the dark, by confiscating the Torah information that they require, God is fundamentally, even though they're responsible for the sins, but they are not accountable, because it's like the insanity plea. When a person claims to have been insane when he committed a homicide, they don't do the death penalty because he's not accountable. So therefore, in order to be responsible for sins, you have to be accountable as well. You have to know that what you're doing is a sin, and that God doesn't want it, and that it can prevent you from going to Olam Haba. But if you have no knowledge of a sin, you don't even know that it's a sin, and then you go into a status of a tinik shenishba, a young, very young child, or even the baby, who's captured by the goyim, and he's brought up by adopted parents of goyim. Such a baby, such a person, a Jew, does not know any of the mitzvahs. He's completely ignorant of the 630 commandments. So therefore, because he is a tinok, a baby, shenishba, that is captured among the goyim, such a Jew is not accountable for any of the sins that he does. So therefore, the Satan, who's the angel of justice, of doing sins. So this is the way that fundamentally God saves Jews, even when they sin. He keeps on reincarnating them and bringing them back in a position, in a status of greater and greater darkness. And this darkness is called Tigboirus Hara, the ascendancy of evil. So the main way that God saved the Jews is by bringing them back over and over again and giving them less and less accountability, because he gives them less and less information. They don't even know that they're sinning anymore. A person who has no idea of the mitzvahs of Shabbos is not accountable for Mechalel Shabbos. And therefore the sin of Mechalel Shabbos cannot be accused of that. So therefore, how does he get Olam Haba? Well, he gets Olam Haba, at least with the mitzvahs that he does have. And many of those mitzvahs are Ben Adam L'Adam, between the category of mitzvahs that have to do with mankind. He loses most of the mitzvahs that have to do between man and God. He doesn't know them, so therefore he's considered a tinok shenishba. Considered like an infant that is completely in the dark about what the mitzvahs are, because he has no Jewish education. So therefore, he cannot be held accountable. But he can be held accountable, let's say, for lashon hara, or for stealing, because those mitzvahs are magical. Those mitzvahs you keep, because that has to do with the welfare of mankind. So the God is therefore always reducing the mitzvahs. When he destroyed the temple, God took away hundreds and hundreds of mitzvahs. when God put the Jews into exile among the nations of the world, he took away all those mitzvahs that had to do with the land of Israel, the mitzvahs of Shemitah, Tumas, the mitzvahs, and so on and so forth, that the Jews were not required to do once they were outside of the land of Israel. So the reason why God is taking away many mitzvahs by destroying the temple and by putting us in exile is to reduce the number of mitzvahs that we have to do. So therefore, we no longer can do these mitzvahs. And the reason why the Jewish people are today so the terrible minority, at least 10% of all the Jews in the world that are actually religious only constitute about 5 or 6%. Only 5 or 6% of the Jews in the world today are religious. The rest of them are not. But yet these people will still be in Olam Haba to the degree that they can be there, because they will be held unaccountable. Please mute your phone. So we therefore see that human history, what is human history? Please mute your phone. So God is saving the Jews throughout history. History is simply the journey of the Jews throughout history to be more and more reduced and diminished in the number of mitzvahs that they do, so that God can save them. The fundamental intent of human history is God is attempting to save the Jews who don't keep the mitzvahs. And as history goes on, he takes away more and more mitzvahs. He takes away more and more free will till the end of time when the Mashiach comes. And therefore, those Jews will only have the Olam Haba, which will be granted them because of the mitzvahs that they did. That is the purpose of human history, to continuously give Jews another opportunity and another opportunity and another opportunity to try and keep some of the Torah, or at least as many mitzvahs as they can, so that they can earn Olam Haba. Because most of the mitzvahs are taken away either through the ability to do them, like the temple, or the Golus by going into exile, or by the knowledge. God removes the knowledge of the Torah so that they're not accountable. So that eventually most Jews can earn the world to come with the mitzvahs that they have done. So therefore, what does God say? So therefore, God, the Chazal, the sages say that the Mashiach can only come in two ways. The Mashiach can come if the generation has mostly tzaddikim, has all tzaddikim, or the generation has all wayward Jews that do not keep mitzvahs anymore and therefore are considered like they were Shoyim. It says that only in these two generations can the Mashiach come. Because it says, Ani Hashem be'itach ishena, that the Mashiach can come anytime the Jews are all righteous, and then the Mashiach can come at any point in human history, or it can come when the Jews finally reach such a low status that they don't do any mitzvahs at all anymore, or barely any. Only those generations can receive Mashiach. Why? Because in those generations, there are no more ketugim, there are no more accusations. What holds the Mashiach back is not that Jews go down in their holiness, in their kedusha, or they go down in the number of mitzvahs that they do. That's not what holds the Jews back. What holds the Jews back is their ignorance or their ability simply to be unaccountable. So when the Satan cannot accuse them of doing sins, then the Mashiach can come. The Mashiach can only come when the Jews reach a level where they're all tzaddikim, and therefore they are all doing the mitzvahs, and therefore they're not liable, or else they are completely ignorant of all the mitzvahs, and they're not accountable. Only in such a circumstance can the Mashiach come, when there is no accusations against the Jews at all anymore, because they're unaccountable. Either they're accountable and they are tzaddikim, righteous people, or they become unaccountable, and therefore they cannot be accused. Only these two generations could bear the Mashiach. And so therefore, God sees that the Jewish people will fundamentally not keep many of the mitzvahs. So what does God do? He has chosen the path of unaccountability. when the Jews are unaccountable, that's when the Mashiach can come, because that's what's going to happen. So the question, who's going to make the Jews unaccountable? Who's going to bring the darkness that the Jews need from the Torah to be qualified for the Mashiach to come? So God says this to the Erevav, you will do it. Why? Because since you prevented the Mashiach from coming at the time of giving of the Torah, you prevented Moshe Rabbeinu from being Mashiach, you will be also those people that I will bring back at the end of time, and you will make all the Jews unaccountable. In other words, you will be those people who will always lead the Jews to do sins. And when they don't know about it, either you will dismiss the religion from the Jews, like the Reformed Jews, conservative or Reconstructionists. You will fundamentally take the Jews away, or their belief that God gave the Torah. So therefore, in that way, you will make them unaccountable, because there will be a Tigboris or there'll be a darkness. You know what I mean? So therefore, I need someone to do this. And since you have done this to the Jewish people already, when I gave out the Torah, you will be the people I will assign. So I'm going to bring you back at the end of time, and you will accomplish my purpose by making, if the Jews don't become tzaddikim, so therefore you will make the Jews into Tinuk Shenishba. You are the people who will influence most of the Jews to become a Tinuk Shenishba. So they don't even know what they're doing anymore. And fundamentally, they will be unaccountable for the mitzvahs that are required to bring on Olam Haba. And they will have some of those mitzvahs left on a level. So therefore, the Erevav has to come back at the end of time. They have to conduct a third war again. They have to make the Jews and unaccountable for this. That's right. So they first are accountable at the time of giving the Torah, but they have to come back at the end of history and finally create a generation of Tinuk Shenizba who will be able to go to Olam Haba with a minimum of mitzvahs. So when they come back again, they will be following the command of God, even though they don't know it. They think that they're taking away the Torah and convincing them not to keep the mitzvahs. So they think that they are accomplishing as successful in doing this. But what they don't realize, they're only successful because God wants them to be successful. God's need a Tinuk Shenizba generation to bring the Mashiach. And they are his instrument. They are the mechanism which will make the Jews unaccountable so that God could save most of his children. Because God wants to save the Jews, his children, for Olam Haba. And not only that, they will also be among the Goyim, because they will do something which is astonishing, which I will say, which I begin to discuss. They will do another thing which fundamentally no one really knows. It's not visible, really, to most Jews of what they're going to do. But I will discuss this toward the end of the lecture. So because of what they've done to the Jews in terms of the golden calf, they have to come back at the end. But what is their power? How could they do this? How is it possible that they have actually a power to make most of the Jews unreligious in Tinuk Shenizba? That's only a power given to the Mashiach. The ability to influence the Jews, not to keep the Torah, and to be completely loyal to this doctrine is almost a messianic power. So the question is, how does the Erevav achieve this power? How do the Reformed Jews in America, the Reformed rabbis in America, able to convince most of the Jewish people that the Torah is not true, the Torah is not written by God? Most of the Jews in America are Reformed, conservative, or Reconstructionist Jews. How do they have the power to actually do this? And there's a very important concept that most people don't realize. One of the ways that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to bring the Jews out of Egypt is with the mater, the staff. The staff of Moshe Rabbeinu was a magical staff. On that staff was written the name of God. Was written a certain name of God, which had literally magical powers. And how did Moshe Rabbeinu get the staff? He got it from Yisro, really. How? Because the staff was actually placed in a rock. It was placed near a rock. Somehow it got into a stone, a very large stone. And no one was able to take out the matter, the staff of Moshe Rabbeinu. No one was able to take it out of the stone. But when he came to Midian, to his future father-in-law, to Yisro, and he saved the daughters of Yisro from Amalek, he saw a staff sticking out of a stone. He didn't know what that staff was. And he grabbed the staff as a weapon, and he pulled it out. But that staff was impossible to pull out. It was merged with the stone. Magically, it was merged. The matter that Moshe had was merged with the stone. No one was able to pull it out. When he put his hands on it, it suddenly let go and it came out. Why? Because the staff was like a wand. We know in a certain sense that, like, for example, in a certain way, sorcerers who can do magical tricks have a wand. They have a magical wand. But the principle is that the sorcerer does not choose the wand. The sorcerer, the wand chooses the sorcerer. So in other words, the matter of Moshe Rabbeinu, the staff of Moshe Rabbeinu, had the same vibrations as the Mashiach. It responds to the same vibration as the Mashiach, and therefore it belongs to him and to no one else. The matter cannot be used. Even though it has the name of God, it is not vulnerable to anyone else. So even if a person uses the matter, it doesn't work. The magic doesn't work. The Kabbalistic name of the name of God does not work. It only responds to the person that it's assigned to. The staff is assigned to the person, and the person is assigned to the staff. There's an intimate relationship between the Mashiach and the matter, so that only the Mashiach can use the matter. Well, guess what? The only other person that can use the matter was not Moshe Rabbeinu. There was another people that could use the matter. Who was that? The Erev Rav. That's right. The Erev Rav was able to connect to the matter, the staff of Moshe, in terms of its ability to acquire magical powers. The Erev Rav actually was able to acquire messianic powers. So what we see is a very strange phenomena, that we're not dealing with the matter itself physically, but we're dealing with the spiritual power of the matter that was subject to the Erev Rav. Wow! How did the Erev Rav get the magical ability to use the matter and so on? It got that ability because of the golden calf. When they took away the messianic period from Klal Yisrael at the giving of the Torah, therefore the Nun Sharei Bina, in a certain sense, went into Golus. It went into exile. It's said to have gone into the Klippus, into the negative forces. And when the Nun, the 50th gate, went into Golus, the exile, and went into negative forces, it was able to be controlled by the Satan, by the evil inclination. Because since Klal Yisrael sinned, with their sin, they gave power, the power of the evil realm, to suddenly control the 50th gate. And the matter of Moshe Rabbeinu is connected to the 50th gate. It's with that matter that was able to go up to Har Sinai, to the Mount Sinai, and bring down the 50th gate, which is like a magical information of what the Torah contains. But that magical information, or that matter, was now in the klippus, because it was in the shells, what's called the negative energy, and it was in the negative. It was in the domain of negative energy, because the Jews actually sinned at Sinai in worshiping the golden calf. So therefore, the Erev Rav, who seduced Israel to do that, now have the 50th gate in their midst. Besides being in the midst of Esav, which is another force that has it, is in the hands of the Erev Rav, because if they were able to acquire it. So what we see is an amazing thing, that there are two different people on the matter. There's a constant confrontation between two people who both have control of the matter, and there's a confrontation with the two of them. Who will dominate? The Mashiach ben Yosef, his energy is connected to the matter of Moshe, the staff of Moshe, spiritually. He will have tremendous powers to bring the Jews back to the worship of God and back to the knowledge of God. How? He will have the spiritual force of the 50th gate that's represented in the staff, the matter. But there's someone else who has the power to use the matter, the Erevav, because they took the 50th gate and the power of the Mashiach partially to them. Because they got it because the Jews worship the golden calf. So therefore we see that the matter of Moshe is now given over to two forces. It's given over to the force of the Mashiach himself, and it's given over to the force of the Erevav. So there's a constant battle at the end. So that's why at the end of history, which is now, the end of history where the Mashiach is about to come, the ruling class is the Erevav. They rule most of the Jews because most Jews are not from. And they have a kind of messianic power to control the spirituality of Klal Yisrael because of the sin of the golden calf. And therefore they are able to make Klal Yisrael into a Tinik Shenishba, which is required for Klal Yisrael to survive the exile and get Olam Haba. So now we see not only that the Erevav has to come back in time to make the Jews with an insanity plea, to make them unaccountable, but they actually have a messianic power to do so. They have the ability to control even greater than the Mashiach himself. The Mashiach cannot come because the staff is in the hands of the Erevav, and that's the real explanation. The question is, why can't the Mashiach come? Why hasn't the Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David ever come? Well, the answer to that is because fundamentally the power of the messianic revival is in the hands of the Erevav and the hands of the Golos and the hands of Esav too. But fundamentally in this generation and many generations before, it's in the hands of the Erevav. So there's an actual going on right now between the Erevav and the Mashiach, whoever the Mashiach is. There's a war where both of them control the matter, but it's the Erevav who dominates that control. That's right. The ability of the Erevav to hold the messianic matter, the messianic light, is greater than that of the Mashiach ben Yosef. And until that shlita, that dominion ends, the Mashiach cannot reveal himself. He cannot be appointed. He cannot be assigned. And the Mashiach cannot come. Because the energy that's used by the Mashiach to bring back the Jews to God is now in the hands of what? The Erevav, who are the Reform, conservative, Reconstructionists, and so on, and all those enemies of Jewish spirituality which try and take the Jews away from God. So now you have an amazing concept, you have an amazing understanding of what's really going on. I've given a messianic interpretation to the shlita, to the power of the Erevav himself, that this is a war between the Mashiach and the Erevav, and that's why they dominate. There's another class of people who are Erevav. They are enemies of the Jews, literally enemies of the Jews. And who is that? That's not the Reformed and conservative and Reconstructionist rabbis. Besides that, there's an actual enemy of the Jews who is Erevav and controls them also. And who is that? The Zionists, the secular Zionists, are really part of the Erevav. Why? Because they fundamentally control the welfare of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael. They were the ones who were the first rulers of the land of Israel, under Chaim Weizmann and all the people at that time. These are secular Zionists. Fundamentally, they control the government of Israel. The government of Israel is controlled by the secular Zionists. And why? Because these secular Zionists are Erevav, who hold dominion over the land of Israel itself because of what they did to the Jews 3,500 years ago. And that's why they are the ones. That's why Chaim Weizmann and all those people who are really Jewish heroes, that are the heroes of Israel, are fundamentally Erevav. And that's where they get their domination from. Now, how are they the enemy of Israel? They are the enemy of Israel because it is the Erevav that allows the Arabs or Yishmael to war against Israel. The Erevav, or the secular Zionists, are continuously making deals, making arrangements with the Arabs to allow them to exist and to succeed. Every time the Arabs attack the Jews do not give the Arabs back what they do. The Jews refused, the Erevav in Israel, the secular Zionists, refused to war against the Arabs and finish the war finally. They refused to take them out. They've had many occasions where they can simply cause the Arabs to disappear in the last 50 years. Many times they could have done that, but they always stop. Who stops? Because the Jews always listened to the land of the Christians. They always follow the Christians in the sense with the Arabs. You have to give them back land. Those people who claim to have a two-state solution are the secular Zionists. They want to share the land of Israel with the Arabs. But it's one thing to let the Arabs live there and still be decent people. It's another thing to share dominion of the land of Israel. So therefore we see that the Erevav, the secular Zionists, are the enemy of Israel, truly the enemy, because the Jews are in deep trouble in Israel. They are constantly at the possibility of taking over the land of Israel by the Arabs. The Arabs continuously kill them, continuously create pogroms, continuously war with them, continuously have terrorism. And why is it that these Arab terrorists still survive when the Jews could easily take them out? Because the Erevav wants that. The secular Zionist wants to please the Christian world, and therefore they want to make peace with the Arabs, who only want to kill the Jews and destroy them. The Arabs know exactly what they want. They want to annihilate the Jewish people. They want to put them under servitude. They want to control the land of Israel. They want to take the land of Israel and steal it from the Jews. Most of the Arabs in the land of Israel come from other Arabs, Syrian Arabs, and Egyptian Arabs, and so on. Most of the Arabs in the land of Israel were not there to begin with. They came later on. They came later on in the 19th century, in the 1800s. They came to Israel and they decided to take over the jobs. Most of the Arabs in Israel now, if you read the books on the subject, how did the Arabs themselves get to Israel? Because they came to Israel when Israel was still somewhat desolate. And they came to Israel because they were led into Israel. How? Because the Christian nations led them into Israel after the Balfour Declaration was declared. After the Christian nations, specifically England, gave the land of Israel to the Jews and so on, but they slowly took it back. And they allowed millions of Arabs to come into Israel by themselves and slowly be a force of enemy. So therefore we see an amazing thing, that the real enemy of the Jewish people are not only the Arabs. The real enemy of the Jewish people are the Christians, and the real enemy of the Jewish people are the secular Zionists who completely tolerate the Arabs. So therefore they play a chess game. They play ping pong. If you hurt us, we'll hit you back in equal proportion. The Jews never annihilate the Arabs or take away their dominion. They only punish them with a slap on the hand. It's only at the worst moments that the Jews will declare war against the Arabs, but they will never truly go to war with the Arabs. They will never truly do that, because they will never confiscate the land of Israel from the Arabs finally. And it is the secular Zionists who allow the Arabs to keep the holy places. The astonishing fact is, what nation on earth, what religious nation on earth would ever tolerate an enemy to have possession of their holiest place? How could the Jews tolerate that the Arabs control the Temple Mount? This is complete blasphemy to any religion on earth. If the Arabs, for example, lost the Kaaba, their holy place in Saudi Arabia, in Mecca, and then suddenly they got it back, do you think they would let the enemy even keep the Kaaba for 5 minutes? Of course not. Once they have dominion over the land that they control in the Muslim nation, they would recapture the Kaaba, of course, because this is the holiest place for Islam. It's the Kaaba in Saudi Arabia and Mecca. It's their temple. So the question is, how could the Jews, who have the holiest place for the Jews, which is the temple itself, How could they allow the Arabs to control the Temple Mount, which is their holiest place? Only the Erevav can. Only the people who have contempt, such contempt for God and for the Torah and for the temple, would ever allow that when they have dominion. The Arabs do not control Israel. The Jews do. Yet the Jews allow the Arabs to have the temple in complete contempt of God. So it turns out that the Erevav not only dominates Israel in terms of the religion, not only makes them a Tinnik in Israel, but it dominates the land of Israel through the government, and it completely allows the Arabs to have control over the Temple Mount and also the Hebron. How could the Jews allow the Arabs to have control over the forefathers of the Jewish people, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? How? Who controls Hebron? The Arabs do. Who controls the Temple Mount? Who controls the Moras Machpelah, the cave of Machpelah, where Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are buried? The Arabs do. And who lets them? The Jews, the Erevav, secular Zionists. So the two holiest places, the cave of Machpelah and the place of the temple itself, the holy temple, they are controlled by Arabs because the Jews allowed them to do that. In fact, Dayan, when he took back the Temple Mount, he actually gave the keys to the Temple Mount back to the Arabs. Astonishing. He gave them the keys of Hebron and the Temple Mount back to the Arabs who now control it. He gave them the keys to our holiest place back to them. So fundamentally, the real enemy of the Jews are the secular Zionists. And when the Mashiach comes, he will dismiss them all. Gush Katif, the land of Gaza, gave the land of Gaza back to the Arabs. The land of Gaza, Gush Katif, which was a settlement of the Jews, belonged to the Jews. Gaza belongs to the Jews. It's part of the land of Israel. And who returned it to the Arabs, who then took it and destroyed all the agriculture that was grown there. Who did not only that, who used it as a base of terror. The secular Zionists under Sharon. He gave them a part of the land of Israel back. And what have they done with it? What have the Arabs done with the land of Israel? What have they done with Gaza? They've made it into a terrorist base. So therefore, the Erevav is not only the Reform, Conservative, and Reconstructionist Jews, and so on. They are these people, the secular Zionists who control the land of Israel, are part of this Erevav. And all of it is a conspiracy to take away Judaism, to take away God, fundamentally from the Torah and from the land of Israel. And now Israel is fundamentally mostly secular Zionists. There are a lot of them, first saw them, who are somewhat religious, but the knowledge of God are fundamentally controlled by the secular Zionists. And it's decreed. Why do they own the land of Israel? Why are they the power of the land of Israel? Why is this government a socialist government, fundamentally? Because the secular Zionists own the land of Israel. They control the land of Israel. And many of the Jews are ignorant totally of this fact. But when the Mashiach comes, everything will be returned. Everything will change. And their shlita will be over. And you see that this era is starting because you see a very strange event that is happening in the land of Israel. Israel cannot form a government. They've tried 5 times. And every time, no party of these secular Arabs, no party at all, of these secular Zionists, is able to obtain 61 seats. They go up to 60. They cannot get 61 seats. So for 5 times they have tried to make a government. And this is the first time this is happening in Israel. Why is God doing this? Because it's almost the time for Mashiach. This is the greatest sign, one of the greatest. This is one of the greatest signs that the Mashiach is imminent. that God is saying to the secular Zionists, you no longer will be able to form a government to control Israel. You will be stationed, but you will no longer able to win an election. This is a decree from God, because it is a sign that God is ending the domination of the secular Zionists, and he's ending the domination of these irreligious Jews who completely control the Reformed rabbis and all these people who can completely control the spirituality of God Yisrael. Fundamentally, God is going to end it, and we are imminently looking at the return of Israel to what? To a spiritual leader, not to a fictitious leader. So God says, okay, you want to form a government? God is saying after 5 times with the Jew could not form the government, he says, okay, I will let you form a government. I will let the Arab form a government. But how? Only if you partner with the Arabs, with the Ram party. So the only way the Jews can actually form, the secular Zionists can form a government, is by being a partner to the Ram party, the Arabs. In fact, since they depended on the Arabs to keep them in power, because if they seceded from the coalition, the whole government would fall. So therefore, the Arab Ram party, who was an Arab party, actually became the leading party of Israel with only a couple of seats. They actually controlled. They controlled the finances, and they controlled the ability of the Jews to war against the Arabs and take the whatever power they have back from the Arabs, because the secular Zionist government even fundamentally conceded their power over to the Arabs so that they will be able to remain in power. So therefore, we see what God is doing to the Arabs. We see what God is doing to the secular Zionists. He is gradually taking away their domination over the land of Israel. So we see that fundamentally what? God is taking away the power that the Arab has over being the last goal of Israel. Yes, they have succeeded. They have succeeded. Their rabbis and the rabbis and their government of Israel has succeeded in decimating Klal Yisrael, in making all of the Jewish people, most of them not religious, in giving over the government of Israel fundamentally to the Arabs, is compromising with the Arabs continuously to let them stay in power over the and Moritz Machpelah, and to let them dominate and so on. Why? Let them survive and be dominant forces and be partners with the Arabs. All these things the secular Zionists have done, because this is the last era. And this is what the Vilna Gaon meant, that at the end of time, right before the Mashiach comes, the one that will dominate the Jews is what? Is not the Christians. Is not Esav. The one who will dominate the Jews is the Erev, and they will dominate the Jews spiritually by being able to cancel out the Torah that was given by God and creating a new Torah. Because fundamentally, what the Erev does is to create a new Torah. And tell the Jews what God gave them. So therefore, the Reformed rabbis say to the Jews, and they dominate the Jewish people spiritually. So what they say to all the Jews that they control, God did not give the 630 commandment. No. If anything, Moses gave the Jews the mitzvah of Shvius. Shvius and the mitzvah of Shabbos. Shabbos is not a mitzvah in the Torah. Shabbos was a mitzvah that was written by Moshe Rabbeinu. They have canceled God and separated God from the Torah that he gave. And what have they done? They've replaced God. And they said, this is the Torah that God gave you, where there is no Shabbos, there is no kashrus, there is no mitzvahs, except what we tell you are the mitzvahs in the Torah. Because fundamentally the Shlita, the dominion of the Erev, they simply have not canceled the presence of God from the mitzvahs. What they have done is they've canceled the whole concept of what the Torah is. That the Torah is not about mitzvahs. The Torah is about some kind of symbolic behavior of Judaism. Judaism is simply a symbol. It's simply the way you behave by performing certain rituals or saying you're Jews, but Jewish religion, Jews are really an ethnic group. They are a symbol. They are not a spiritual force. So they've redefined what the Torah is. So therefore, one of the ways you can identify who an Erev Rav is, I will not say any of the names of what we talk about, except the ones that maybe not alive anymore. But I will tell you certain ways to identify an Erev Rav. And the way to be identified is that whenever a person comes up and he redefines Torah, he simply does not cancel Torah. If a Jew gets up and tries to convince other Jews not to keep the Torah, that's not necessarily an Erev Rav. Because the Erev Rav is composed of two actions, not one. The action of taking people away from Torah is not the action of an Erev Rav. That's the action of an unreligious Jew or Russia. The action of an Erev Rav is to replace Torah he took away from God with a new Torah, a Torah that he says what God gave. He actually reconstructs the Torah in a way which defines the Torah, his definition, the reformed definition of what Torah is. They are the ones who create the symbols that the Jews will keep. That is considered the Torah. The Torah is not a divine instrument. It is a human instrument. It is a symbol that's defined by the Erev Rav. So therefore, they do a double action. They take away spirituality from the Jews and a connection with God, and they replace it with their definition of what they say is now the Torah. And that's the definition of an Erev Rav, fundamentally. Now, there's one thing that they did which is permanent, which really is completely is not known. But the Erev Rav not only changed the definition of the Torah, they changed the definition of idol worship. That's right. At the time when God gave the Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu, 3,200 years ago, at that time, God intended to change not only the commandments from 7 to 613, God also intended to change the nature of idol worship. That's right. And we really have a little idea of this. What did they do? How did they change the nature of idol worship? Because what they said, the idol that they created was a golden calf. Now, until that time, what was idol worship? Idol worship was the worship of stars and planets. It was the worship of astronomical bodies. Astronomy, to the ancients, was really a form of idol worship. In fact, if you look at all the ancient religions, you will see they were all astrological. That's right. The basis of idol worship is astrology, meaning that there's a belief that the planets have power and forces. And what the ancients used to do is worship the stars. They worship the planets. They worship the 7 planetary bodies, the moon and the sun, and 5 of the planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. These were the gods of the ancient times. For example, Isis, who was a female goddess of Egypt, she really represented the moon. She was the moon god, and therefore she really was a symbol of the moon, and her power came from the moon. The sun god was was Amun-Ra. Was the Egyptians worshipped their main god Amun-Ra as the sun god. So therefore, the entire Egyptian pantheon of idol worship was really planetary bodies. Not only that, for example, if you look at the gods of the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, and the god of the Romans, all of them are planets. All of them are planets. The sun, the moon, the god of war is Ares. Mars, the planet Mars, is the god of war. And why? Because they believed in ancient times that astrological bodies were really gods. And in a certain sense, in a certain way, they were somewhat similar. What does that mean? What the Ramchal says, very interestingly, in Derech Hashem, is that when God wants to bring down his spiritual forces to the universe, the physical universe, how does he bring down the spiritual force to a physical setting? How does he do that? So what the Ramchal says, and it's known in the Kabbalah, that God brings down the spiritual forces through the planets. That's right. How does he do that? Nobody knows. But it says that the planets themselves are the conduits. Stars are conduits for the energy that God brings down to the world to control the physical universe. The physical universe, its planets, its systems, and all galaxies, every star in the universe is in a certain sense of spiritual forces. Right. All the hundreds of trillions and trillions and trillions of stars and galaxies in the world are really conduits of what? Of the spheros. But what are the spheros? The spheros are the spiritual forces that God controls the universe. God punishes and rewards man through the energy that's transferred to the physical universe, which exists through the stars and through the planets. That's what it says in the Kabbalah, and that's true. So in a certain sense, they were right. The ancients are right. The planets are the bedrock of spiritual forces. In other words, if you wanted to go to war and win war, what you would do, you would worship the god of planet Mars, because Mars is a planet, and the ancients saw Mars as the god of war. So therefore, they would worship Mars. And that's partially true. That in a certain sense, the planets and the stars are conduits of the spiritual forces called the spiritual forces, which are called spheres. So therefore, all idol worship is really the worship of stars and planets, and mostly the planets. The five planets and the sun and the moon are the main bodies because they are in our solar system. They are the main conduits that go between heaven and earth. And the energy of them, of those star planets, are the energy of the spiritual energy, which God then controls the consequences of man's behavior spiritually. So this was idol worship in the beginning. There was no such thing as an idol that did not correspond to a planet. It did not exist. Every religion in the ancient times was astrological, whether it was Chinese or Indian or Roman or Greek or any type of thing, or Celtic religions. All the religions were fundamentally conducted through the planets. They were the main intermediaries. So therefore, that's why this thing was changed. So when the Erev Rav created a new idol called the golden calf, this was not the same thing. The golden calf was not astrological. It was a different thing entirely. They changed the face of idol worship. Because before Matan Torah, before God gave the Torah and the Erev Rav created the golden calf, religion, fundamentally spiritual connection, worshipped the planets and the stars. And those planets and stars either had good energy or negative energy. For example, the planet Saturn has a negative force. Saturn represents din, and it was somewhat of a negative force, whereas Jupiter represents beneficence, goodness, it represents goodness in the world. Anything good that comes down to the world comes down to the planet Jupiter. And anything which comes down to the world from din, from consequences, from justice, comes through the planet, let's say the planet Saturn. So there were good planets having good energies, and there were bad planets having negative energies. Mercy and justice were conducted to the physical universe through the planets. But when the Erev Rav created the golden calf, they changed the whole symbolism of idol worship. What was that symbol? It's very important to know this, because that's what fundamentally is the basis of Western civilization. How is that? Because the eagle, what did the eagle represent? It represented the Mashiach. When they made the eagle and they told the Jews to worship the golden calf, they had in mind that Moshe Rabbeinu died, the God who created the universe and who wanted to give the Torah to the Jewish people, What did he want to do? He wanted to give spiritual commandments and so on. But they thought that Moses died. So therefore they wanted to replace Moshe Rabbeinu. The golden calf was a replacement of the Mashiach himself. And they would rather make the Mashiach an idol and not human. Because if the Mashiach is controlled by God, you have to do God's will. But if the Mashiach is an idol, then it has to do your will, because you will tell the idol what it has to do with. If you want a war, you will pray to the idol that represents war. And in this case, the Egel Azov represented everything. It represented goodness as well as bad. So this was never combined, the two. The two, good and bad, were separate. Like in the Persian religion, Zoroastrianism, that religion says that the force of good is represented by one god and the force of evil is represented by another god. But the ancients always separated bad events from good events as controlled by different gods, you see. But the Egel Rav created a new idol. It was a messianic idol. The Egel Azov is really an idol of the Mashiach ben Yosef himself. And that's why he's represented by a calf. Because a calf represents the ox, the bull represents the Mashiach ben Yosef. So therefore, what does this mean? What does it mean that the idol represents a spiritual force? What it means that there was a new way to worship the idol by doing good things. That's right. And there was a new way to worship idol worship is by doing good, beneficence. That was the essence of the Egel Azov. When they said that you have to worship the Egel Azov, they didn't mean that it would be a bad thing. They did not refer to it as the source of negative energy. They referred to it as a messianic force, as a force for spirituality, a force for chesed, a force for loving kindness. So the Egel Azov was now a new idol that represented the force of good. So what does this mean? That means that a person who's evil could now do evil through good. That's what happened. They changed the face of Avodah Zarah, and they said that if you want to do good, mitzvahs, you can be a Russia and still do good. How? How is that possible? Good is only done by tzaddikim, by righteous people. Good is not done by rishonim, evil people. So how could you do good deeds? And how could that represent spirituality? How could that represent negative spirituality or idol worship? Well, in a certain sense, Margaret Thatcher, the former Prime Minister of England, said it. Why? Because you look at communism and socialism. What is fundamentally the creed of communism and socialism? It's that they believe that the people should govern themselves. The people have all the rights. Socialism is the religion of the people, that they dominate. It's not the religion of a government. The whole government is based on the people, what you have to do for people. So Russia, which became communist, believes that what? That the people should dominate. These should be the force. It's a government for the people, by the people, of the people. But that's good, right? No. Because what happened to the Russia? What kind of government did Russia have? They had one of the most evil governments on earth. Stalin, who was a tremendously evil person, was the head of the Communist Party. He was the head of the religion that fundamentally espoused what Karl Marx said, that it should be controlled by the people. It should be dominated, controlled, and it existed for the purpose of serving people, which is a good thing. But it was taken over by evil people. The evil people just did good in name only, but in their actual deeds, they did evil. They controlled the people. They dominated because they said, man, in order to give power to the people, there is no such thing as ownership. Nobody owns anything. And the government is the supervisor of the good. The government now is the supervisor of the good that's supposed to come from communism. The government is the supervisor of the good that's supposed to come from socialism. So therefore, they still maintained it was good because it was for the people. They were the purpose of socialism, communism. But who was it run by? It was run by evil people who did only evil. They took power. Socialism became an instrument of power. Communism became an instrument of power. Dictators don't say they're going to do bad. When Hitler came on Germany and as the new leader, he was the Führer. He said he existed to do good for the German people. He would raise the German people up to the highest level of das Volk, the super race, the Aryan race, which is a super people. But did Hitler say he was going to do bad for the Germans? No. He said he was going to only do good, and he did a lot of good. He made highways. He did all kinds of things. He created jobs and so on and so forth. He did a lot of good, but he only did good what? For the Germans. For the rest of Europe, he killed them. They served him and so on. He was a dictator. He was an annihilator. So in other words, there is goodness in some things that they do, but the goodness only exists for a selected class of people or for everybody. When a government comes up and says, we want everyone to have good, and therefore we erase borders. There are no more borders. There are no more borders. There's no more borders between a criminal and a non-criminal. There's no more borders between one country and another. There's no many borders between one sex and another. The elimination of all natural borders is a form of good because they want to do good for everybody. But it's really a form of bad because it distorts reality. They will distort reality and to do good. So what Margaret Thatcher said, very wise, she said, even socialists eventually run out of other people's money. That's right, that's what she said. In other words, socialism is said to be good. Its purpose is to serve man, to serve human beings. So therefore, it's a good thing. No, it's evil. Because in order to do their socialism, they have to steal, through taxes, money from other people. So in other words, they create laws where they can take your money through taxes and do it for whatever they want. And what do they do with the money? They fundamentally give it out to other people as good. But by doing the good to other people through taxes, by taking their money forcefully, they declare that they are good. So therefore, a new concept is created, that evil is only done in the name of good. That's astonishing. When did it happen? That was never the religion. Religion, it either had good gods or bad gods. There were good planets and bad planets. So when did this suddenly become completely inverted? By the Erev Rav. When they made the first Avodah Zarah in the form of a Mashiach, they declared that the Mashiach as an idol is the true leader of Klal Yisrael. And therefore, they created the spiritual energy which fundamentally supports that energy throughout human history. Because fundamentally, religion changed at that time to a certain extent, where now goodness, responsibility, and so on, maturity now takes the place of what? Of idol worship. So in a certain sense, the fact that idols became good, symbols of goodness, but did evil behavior, was first started by the Erev Rav. And this was because God wanted to change the nature of idol worship itself when he gave the Torah. When God gave the Torah of 630 mitzvahs, he changed the face of idol worship itself, that it would also include good concepts, that any dictator, any tyrant, any Russia will also espouse goodness. And therefore you can't really tell the difference between a Russia and a tzaddik, because the Russia talks like a tzaddik. You can't even tell the difference. Hitler was the worst Russia of them all, but he spoke like a tzaddik to the German people, and so on, the Aryan race. So therefore, the fact that good and bad merged into a hybrid, and so that even Avodah Zarah, idol worship, became a representative, a symbol of that hybrid energy, that hybrid spirituality for the rest of time. And if you look at history and philosophy, you will always see there was always a hybrid relationship between a dictator of some sort and so on, and an evil man, and espousing always to do good. But he does it in such a way where he takes the money from people, so to do bad, or he espouses, he takes control, power to do bad, but it's always in the name of good. So this is something that is really unknown. It's really unknown that now goodness is controlled also by evil men. Not only do tzaddikim or good people do good things, but even evil people do good things. And by doing good things, they acquire massive power. They dominate. They are cruel and evil and dominating. But even though they talk about good, so when the kings in the past, in the last 1,000 years, always claimed that they were appointed by God. That's what all kings, the kings of England and France and all the nations, they always felt that they were appointed by God. They have the divine right of rule. Well, where did that come from? The concept of a divine right to rule. Nobody has a divine right to rule. Only God. So how does a person claim, as he was a king of a land, that he has a divine right? Because that's an example of good of evil in the disguise of good. Because these kings always took money from people and made wars. They were always at war. In Europe, all the kings were always at war with each other. But yet they all said they rule because God made them rule. That means God shared in their evil. But the ability to declare yourself a good king and yet do evil is exactly what the Erev created. And therefore, the Erev, which created the religion, the spirituality, the idol worship of an idol, now symbolizes good. It's a disguise. They created a new disguise for evil deeds, for the acquisition of power, ruthlessness, cruelty. Yet they claim goodness, saintliness, and so on. And this has been the fundamental rule of mankind for the rest of human history. So therefore, the Erev did something much more permanent than meets the eye. They created a new concept of a hybrid religion, where evil will wear a disguise of a tzaddik. And the Erev and Matan Torah was the first time that became a manifestation of religion. And that is with us today for the rest of human history. And if you study human history, you will always see the hybrid combination of good as a disguise for evil happening to all the countries on earth. All of them, without exception, have some form of disguise that they perpetrate over their evil. So therefore, this is the Erev. How do you recognize an Erev? By his actions. Why? Because he simply doesn't take away God and doesn't take away mitzvahs. What he does is, he says, I will give you a new religion, a good religion. That's an Erev. That's what he does. He says, I will rewrite the Torah in a different form. And in that form, it is evil, but it wears beautiful clothes. So this is the Erev. And they have obtained shlita, or dominion, since the time of the Chet HaVegel. They have influenced human history, but they have influenced human history not only for Jews. They are not only a hybrid religion for Jews, in the sense that they control the religion and spirituality of most of the Jewish people today, and most of the Jewish people for the last couple of 100 years. But they have always been a force for evil in the disguise of good. But the Erev also exists, this concept of an Erev also exists by the Goyim. That's right. You see it. How? Because you look, for example, in Christianity, and Christianity killed many millions and millions of people. So in the name of Jesus, who was supposed to represent good, they've killed millions of people. They've decimated and punctured and troubled and caused immense pain for millions of people. England ruled the earth. It said that the sun never sets on an English country. The whole world was ruled by England. And what was the good of that? So England claimed, well, we're promoting Christianity. How? By war, by dominion, by slavery, and so on. by taking over the economy of a country. You see it. Because with the good that they do, underneath that good, there's really evil. And this is fundamentally the concept of many religions today, that they do tremendous evil, all in the name of God, in the name of spirituality. Not like the old days where they did evil in the name of evil. An evil king didn't mind calling himself evil. In fact, he was proud of it. It showed his power. The only desire that kings and tyrants wanted everyone to know is their power, not their goodness. They never hid behind tzidkis and good deeds. But today, that's not the rule. Any spirituality that's created today and for the last several thousand years has always been created in the disguise of goodness. But who invented that? Who changed the face of idol worship? Who changed the face of evil so that the person always doing the evil deeds is always calling himself good? The Erevav. This comes from the Erevav. So therefore, that's why the Erevav is able to rule even today. Because this principle of good disguising evil still exists today. And finally, when the Mashiach comes, he will finally eliminate this hybrid form of spirituality and restore dignity and tzidkis and righteousness to God. God will no longer be seen in a good way by doing evil. No longer will evil be done in the name of God, but good will be done and good will be seen. That's what the Mashiach will restore. So I wanted to give the share today in terms of defining who the Erevav. What most people don't know, the Erevav is a force, a spiritual force that is much deeper than anyone understands. They control the muzzle to a large extent of Klal Yisrael and so on. And this muzzle they will control until the end of time, until the Mashiach comes, when finally good will not only look good, it will also be good. Goodness is not only an appearance, it's also an essence. Because a good person does good things. A good person does not do evil things. No longer will this type of hybrid religion exist in the Messianic period of time. So this is the Erevav, this is their purpose. God needs them, and he wants them to do, because he needs them to make Klal Yisrael unaccountable. But in doing that, God is doing a good, because he's saving the Jewish people, no matter what level of sin, almost every level of sin. The Jews are almost guaranteed to go to Olam Haba, and many Goyim are also guaranteed to live in Olam Haba. They cannot create Olam Haba, but they can live in there. So God is continuously attempting to save not only the Jews, but to save mankind. And the concept of an Erevav not only exists with Jews, but it also exists with Goyim, with the Goyish religions. The Erevav is the nature and the representation of evil in the world today. There is no evil man today that doesn't claim that he's a good person, if he's communist, if he's socialist, and if he's a Democrat. They all do evil in the name of goodness, because that's the new hybrid version, and so on. What does that do? That confuses people, because he's saying good, but he's doing confuses people. How can this be good when it's doing evil? And why does God want to confuse people? Because he's trying to save them. And this is the main principle that in Judaism itself, and God determines God's action. What is the main thing that God is doing throughout history? God is trying to save his children. That's it. There's no other purpose. God loves his children. He even loves the Jew. He loves Jews, but he even loves Goyim. Because God said to Abraham, "In you will be rectified and made holy all the peoples of the world." You will be an older brother, Judaism, and there will be younger brothers, other religions, but they will fundamentally be your brothers, and in a certain way, they will also espouse good. And that's the tachlis of the world. So God is always saving his people. How? by confusing them so that they really don't really know what evil and what goodness is. And by saying that, then God is able to save them in some fashion by making them unaccountable. The insanity decree. It's called the insanity defense. God has been increasing the insanity defense throughout human history so that he can save people for Olam Haba. The Jews for creating Olam Haba and the Goyim for being able to reside there. But God is always trying to save people, his children. And this is the rule. And this is what Avraham Avinu was given as a tachlis. He would be not only a Goy Kodesh, he would not only be a holy people in terms of the mitzvahs that he keeps with his nation, but he will be a mamlechus kahanim. He will be a kingdom of priests. And what does that mean, a kingdom of priests? It will be his job to make the people of the world unaccountable by confusing them so they no longer clearly know the difference between right and wrong, good and bad. So therefore, they're fundamentally unaccountable. And therefore, of course, they will get less of an Olam Haba than God had intended them. God had the intention of giving them a much greater portion of the world to come, but God will be satisfied by giving them a less of a portion of the world to come. But at least they will be with him. He will be with his children again. So God wants the Jewish people and even the Goyim to have some level of Olam Haba so that he can be with his people. Because God is in love with humanity as a whole, and especially with the Jewish people who are the gatekeepers for Olam Haba. So the only ones who will really lose out are the anti-Semites. And this is a warning to all the anti-Semites. Any Goy who's an anti-Semite and who's done something to harm a Jew or kill a Jew or rob a Jew or any kind of thing will not be in Olam Haba, because the Jew is the gatekeeper of Olam Haba. It is only through the mitzvahs that the Jews perform and the guarantee that he has to sustain Olam Haba that he will bring about the future eternal world. So let every anti-Semite be warned that he is absolute annihilation, because he is killing, maiming, causing pain for the gatekeeper. And I'm not saying that the Jews don't deserve some of that, but this will all be done in the name of power. That's the fundamental theme of all the nations of the world. Power. Power through what? Through money. Power through possessions. Power through conquest. That's it. Power is the name of the game. And if this is done at the expense of the Jewish people and at the expense of the Torah, then you have to realize what you are looking for. Okay. That's the end of this year. Any questions? Okay, I like these questions. Well, is everyone still here?
How are you?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay.
Very clear, Yesod.
Yeah, I've tried to give the Yesod the whole concept of the Erev Rav is and what they've done.
Yeah.
Which is really unknown.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for listening. Okay?
Thank you, Shimon. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Bye-bye.